So, Chris, this week, well, I guess it was last week, we talked about this idea of computer use that Anthropic released and the impact that it had had on us. And there was certainly a lot of discussion during the week about how people might use these upcoming self-driving computers, as I'm now calling them.
Yeah, it had a particularly powerful impact on me just because I'd speculated several times that this is really the future of AI based computing, simply because it is the ultimate interface in terms of if it can use a computer, it can do everything that a remote worker currently can, which is most things.
Yeah, I think like I go through phases of having these crisis moments with AI stuff where you the mind wanders and you think, well, once the computer can operate itself and the context improves, like the amount of information that it can take in, well, then, yeah, it can pretty much accomplish any task. And of course, this week we've seen OpenAI release a search feature, Google, which we'll get to a little bit later, releasing a grounded search capability as well. So as all these tools become available to the AI models themselves, and then they can use computers as well, there's very little that they can't do that a knowledge worker would do.
I think it's definitely, having used it a fair bit now, it's definitely one of those cases where the reality doesn't quite match the vision, in the sense that it's got problems, it's not perfect, right? But I think we on this podcast really focus on the vision side of it because we know inevitably the technology catches up. Like, if you can have an AI model look at a screen, locate an icon, like for example, in our example last week, locate the coffee category on Uber Eats. If it can do that, then inevitably, as the technology improves and gets faster and more accurate, it'll be able to do anything on the screen, right? And so I think looking at that vision, the possibilities are absolutely enormous.
Yeah, and I guess that in moments like this, people bring up a lot of the problems with it, which I think many people are well aware of. Some of them, for example, security, like we talked about last week on the show with our workspace computer concept for Sim Theory. One of the things we're doing is allowing people to have this personalized virtual computer. And what that enables is you to set the computer up for specific tasks. Like, for example, you might load up Microsoft Excel into that workspace computer, log into your 365 account so that it kind of, the AI has access to your computer and can go and do things in the background for you. But there's obviously some security risks in that, like the AI having control of a computer that has some authentication.
That's true. I mean, there's always risks with everything you do, but lots of people use computers in virtualized environments. Like, it's an entire industry. The security is industry standard. That part I'm not worried about. It's like, yes, giving an AI agency to act as you is a new concept and maybe one that will have inherent risks with it. But I also think that that is where the real power comes from this new technology, because we've had browser automation for a long time. We've had, software, what is it called? Infrastructure as code, where you can spin up a server and install programs and all this stuff for ages. Like, those parts of it aren't new. What is new is the AI being able to handle novel situations when using a desktop computer environment. So it can be given an abstract or concrete goal, and it can then figure out what to do and then do it. But most importantly, it can react when things go wrong. One of the things I said to you in all my testing that I've done in the last week is I noticed so often I would set the Sim Theory workspace computer off on a task and look at what it's doing. Like, the amount of times it opened Microsoft Teams just for no reason. I'm like, it's almost like propaganda level at this point. But it did all this just nonsense stuff where you're like, this thing's just so stupid. And then suddenly I'd check back in a little later and the task had been accomplished. And so I think that's what's really getting me excited about it. It's like, okay, it's like a slow. I was going to use a word I shouldn't use. It's slow, but it gets there, and I think that's what's really exciting about it.
So, you know what I think it best relates to, and I'm sure anyone that's ever owned a robot vacuum cleaner or one of these like 2-in-1s, like where it can mop and vacuum, will totally relate. And I think it's the best analogy is right now it's like one of them where if you painstakingly watch it do its tasks, like go around say your kitchen and vacuum and try and mop like mine does, it takes like probably 10 minutes to find the kitchen. And I'm like, you stupid thing. I ask you to do this literally every day, and you still can't figure it out. But it eventually gets there, and it eventually does the job. Not very well though, but it does.
I know what you mean, and you see it miss an obvious win, and it can't get there. And I think this is really the insight that I've had with it during the week, and I spoke to you about this several times. And my insight is this: you need to equip it with skills, and the skills can't just be move mouse, click and drag, double click, which are its basic skills, or use key presses and things like that. That's what Anthropic has done with their model, is they've optimized it to do those kind of actions based on what it sees. And one of the things they've done to try to make it faster is batch the tool use. So they'll be like, all right, I look at the screen. It's sort of like rehearsing like an Olympic dive or something. It's like, I'm going to do a double back and a half pike, whatever, and then do no splash. And so what it's doing is, I'm going to click that scroll button, then I'm going to drag it for 0.5 seconds, then I'm going to move the mouse to the right and double click something. And so then it has a crack. It does those things based on you giving it the ability to actuate it. And then it takes another screenshot and takes a look and go, how did I do? And that's when it often makes a mistake. It's like, okay, I stuffed that up. I've now got to move the mouse to this point and click it and stuff like that. Now, that's obviously incredibly painstaking. But what you and I discussed is, what if you take the skills beyond that level? It's like, what if you allow it to do things like, I want to move the mouse in a curve shape to, say, draw a dash hound, which is what I've been trying to do during the week. Open paint, draw a dash hound. I don't know why I picked dash hound. The curves. And so I was like, in order to be able to do that, it needs to be able to draw a curve. It's not going to be able to just iterate, just mashing through my credits, doing one pixel at a time or something like that. It's going to need sort of macro-based tools and things like that. And then we're like, well, there's also common things like opening a program, opening a new tab in a web browser, maximizing things. Things that you do on a regular basis on a computer are things that it could be taught to do in one motion, right? So it isn't this idea that it has to learn from scratch for every single task it ever does. And I think that's where the application layer, such as Sim Theory, is going to really add something to this technique, because it's going to be needed in order to make it actually usable for real tasks.
Yeah, there was a discussion in our This Day in AI community this week that I chimed in on, which is this idea is counting pixels the best way to operate a computer? Like the idea that, maybe there's the need for like an AI OS or AI specific applications or websites where, it's just easier for the AI to use them. And I sort of made the comparison to self-driving, where it's like, we're not out there making the existing road infrastructure any easier for self-driving cars. Like they just have to operate like a human. And that's why the problem is so hard to solve. And, so I can see, like, I think these skills that we're teaching is like the early days of when Tesla was developing full self-driving, where they had, a lot of lines of C code where it was like literally if this then that, like if dash hound runs in front of vehicle, don't hit it.
It's like the John Carmack style of programming. Like if you looked at the original Quake source code, like the Quake C source code, when I first looked at that, I was just blown away by just how simple and literal the code was. It's like there were literal if statements for different things that might happen in the game, and it worked brilliantly. And I think that to some degree, that's what's needed in programming and in making something that's useful. And I think everyone has this idea, oh, wouldn't the AI be great if it just had this universal API and it can like call my Gmail to like send an email, it can call my Gmail to archive, it can do this, and there's a perfectly formatted tool use API call for everything I could ever want it to do. But we know that that's not possible. It was like when they talked about the semantic web. It's like, oh, everyone will put special tags that will denote this is a book title, this is a thing, this is a link, this is a whatever, and that'll be amazing. But the reality is that doesn't happen. And I feel like this idea of a universal API needs to go beyond the idea that humans will create it. It needs to be like, our universal API is, I'm just a human and I've got a brain and I can click and I can do all the same stuff and use a regular user interface. And I think that's where it's like, okay, yeah, you can sort of be reductive and say it's just counting pixels. But the truth is, what it's doing is using an interface that allows it to the best possibility of getting any task done.
Yeah, and I kind of think even in the shorter term, developing skills like your dream of drawing a dog in paint with these curved moves, in the short term, that kind of gets you to a better level where it can just do more things and it starts to become a bit useful. But the reality is, I think the model just has to get to the point where it can just handle these things. Like, I don't think there is going to be a bunch of people like there might be in the short term where they go and develop all this middleware. But I think just like we've seen with Teslas, eventually they're just going to get end to end and figure out literally how to drive.
Possibly, yeah. I think in the shorter term, yeah, giving it a lot of tools at its disposal is going to be needed. But you're right. I think at some point the speed's a big factor. Like if it can get a lot faster, it can just iterate more, and so at some point, making all the mistakes doesn't really matter so much. But yeah, I think in the short term, it's going to be empowering it to do the best possible job to actually do something useful. Because I think a lot of the examples we're seeing right now on X are either very contrived, they're either cherry picked examples, or they're just flukes that it just happens to do that really well. And I think what we need to do is keep iterating and looking at the use cases and saying, is it able to do this without a lot of guidance? Because I think the thing is, if there's a lot of guidance, then you could have done it yourself or you could have automated it. It very much needs to be the whole go do this plus, which is my sort of lazy AI man's command, where I literally will just paste a block of crap from a terminal or something and just go fix plus. And then Claude, Sonnet, GPT, ChatGPT 4.0 will just know what I want and solve it. And I think we need to get that level with the computer use where it's like you just give vague, notions of what you would like done. And it's like, on it, sir, I will get to work immediately and gets the job done.
Yeah, I think it has to get to that point where it's like a junior employee and then it will be quite beneficial. For example, I had to fill in an insurance claim a couple of days ago. And I was chatting to the AI about how to, frame it correctly to basically maximize the claim because I don't want to stuff it up, right? And I had it in that context, that mindset. Its context was filled with the right stuff, like, after having gone back and forth. And then it's a case of having to go to the website and fill in the claim, right? Now, that is something that these forms, like, they don't want you to fill in insurance claims, right? Like, they do not want you to claim. So it's like the oldest crappiest form experience on earth from like
we could definitely do a
era.
whole podcast just on that. Yeah,
literally. And so what I would love to be able to do is say to the AI agent, hey, okay, cool, now go fill the claim in on my behalf. And then it just loads up the computer, goes to the site, fills it in, and then notifies me to maybe check it when it's done. I think that's a point where I would be like, okay, that was useful because filling in that form was painstaking and knowing what to put in each field, I was still going back and forward with it to the point they use all this weird lingo. So I shared my screen with that tab in the browser and was asking it like, what should I fill in for this? What should I check for this? And it was able to tell me, which is super useful. But I think the next step is just go do it for me. Like, I don't care. Like, plus, like, go fill in this claim, plus.
Yeah, and I think the other thing you've got to think about is the web browser is an interesting one because you could always do like Chrome plugins and other browser automation stuff along with AI to help do that kind of thing, right? Like that is technically possible. But think about these scenarios where people are using like legacy systems, like people in banking, for example, they're all using like Lotus Notes. And I think last time I shouted out Lotus Notes, someone was like really excited by that. So this is for you.
Yeah.
But they're using these legacy banking systems written in COBOL and stuff, and they're doing it through either VNC connections or like virtual machines. And those interfaces to automate them or to build an API for them or whatever you want to do to sort of integrate AI into that area, that's going to be so incredibly difficult because the people who can actually build an API for it are so few. It might not even be possible or it would have been done. Whereas you bring the universal AI computer use tool thing to the fore, the workspace computer concept to the fore, it can operate that computer, use the virtual machine connection or the VNC connection, and actually provide a way to automate those tasks. Like we're actually like this interface, this universal API, which is a human user interface, is going to allow the AI to be applied in so many more areas that are currently living in this weird legacy world.
Yeah, this is why I wanted to sort of just hone in on this topic in this episode, because to me, when it works or when it gets to a certain level of capability, it's the first time I think our world will be totally changed. Because once it's able to operate and do things and have a large context, and the hallucinations are reduced to a point where it's like just checking in with you to make key decisions, then I don't know, like, what does it mean for certain jobs? Like, certain jobs do start to become very irrelevant once it can do these things.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of sort of data entry operators, basic jobs where you're just moving one thing from somewhere else or doing some basic operation on them. Like a lot of the things you see on not Airtasker, like Fiverr and things like that. Obviously, there's some creative elements in there, but you're seeing the AI being able to do that as well. Obviously, within this context, it being able to then go off and use AI within AI to get answers for itself or generate content or use specialized models is going to be another factor for it. But I mean, we're not that crazy far away from the idea of it producing a bunch of synthetic data, training a new model, invoking that model, and then using it. And it can make all those tools available. I think, like you say, the issue is going to be around hallucination, because as someone who consistently works with the models on code, the amount of times when it's, say, working on the configuration of a program I've never seen before, and I'll tell it my problem. I'll be like, "Oh, I can't get this option disabled in the menu. I'd really like to disable this option." It'll be like, "Oh, just do the disable menu setting. Here it is." And you go do it. You look at the docs. You're like, "No such option exists. It's just made that up." Sounds great. Gets my hopes up. I'm like, "Oh, how amazing are these devs? They've thought of everything." But it's just the AI making it up. And I feel like you're definitely going to run into territory with the computer use thing where it simply is trying to do things that it can't do and thinking that it's the right way to go.
Yeah, yeah. I think it definitely needs some sort of like, and we'll get to it a little bit later, but grounded truth, in the sense that it needs to be validating and checking key decisions and things like that. But I guess just thinking forward, if you assume these are solvable problems, which I mean, you have to believe they are, right? Then it's going to trend this way. The question is, like, how long does it take? Is it 5 years and we have a self-driving computer that can literally do all the tasks on a computer a human can do? Is it 10 years? Is it 15? Is it 30? Are we way off? Are people going to look back at this recording and be like, man, like, we're on our deathbeds and we're like,
I don't
still
think
don't
it's
have
that
it.
far off. Like I'm willing to put myself out there and say that I don't know about fully like everything a human can do, but I would say that if this is the first iteration, the possibilities for this are absolutely enormous, because you think about it, at some point the application layer can simulate the other inputs to a computer as well, like audio, like video. We could have an AI avatar streaming in audio and video through the various virtual input devices. You've got mouse and keyboard operated. And it can do them all at once, like joysticks, like what other accessories are there? Trackpads, trackballs, like it just emulate every device that's ever been available and it give input for them all. Like, it could really imagine it playing flight sim. That's going to happen at some point. And
Yeah.
the other thing we're missing here is that local models running on GPUs are getting a lot better. And people in the local llama community and other areas that are iterating on custom models, like imagine a smaller custom computer operating model running on the GPU itself on the local computer with no latency or less latency than hitting the cloud. Suddenly you're going to get a much more rapid experience than taking a screenshot, uploading it to Anthropic with all the other recent ones and blah, 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 and waiting for that process. You go from, say, 1 or 2 seconds of lag up to 20 seconds of lag to like 100 milliseconds or 200 milliseconds, which may be possible. And you suddenly reach that order of magnitude increase in the ability of this thing to run.
Yeah,
And that's why I think locking yourself into one model is a mistake, because I think that there's going to be other paradigms for running this kind of thing that just work better, and that is running it on a machine itself.
Yeah, I think there's 2 time horizons for me, or 2 like milestones I want to see achieved. The first is basically being able to spawn up virtual employees or agents for yourself. And I think this is the sort of early steps we need to get there, right? Like where it's useful. It can go and do things in the background. I don't think you're going to watch it. I think it's just going to be, you have a to-do list in the morning and you're like, hey, computer, take these 4 or 5 tasks off my plate. Like, you go do these things, check back in when you're done. Just like you would do in a workplace. You know, if you have people working with you or you work on a team, like, you take these tasks, I'll take this, let's all reconvene later on, right? I think that where it's so useful that you're finding yourself using it day to day to just get your job done, and it vastly improves productivity and maybe eliminates some lower level jobs as part of that, or it just makes people way more productive. So, you know, it doesn't actually lead to any sort of real job loss. So I think that's the first one. And I think people will need to iterate and work with it, just like that workspace concept we talk about all the time. But then I think it's going to get to another point where it's just vastly superior.
Where you're choosing to use it over consulting someone first up on a novel task that you can't do yourself. I think, to me, that's level 2. Level 1 is, okay, I know this process like the back of my hand because it's my job, and I can give it very good instructions. Because the other thing that we haven't really iterated on yet, even us, is prompting. And I feel like the prompts that Anthropic gave in their examples were quite basic. I really feel like there's scope to vastly improve that, including multi-shot learning, where you're like, okay, here's a task I do. Here's what it looks like before it starts. Here's what it looks like in the middle, like a half-filled insurance form. And here's what it looks like when successful, happy, I have my money at the end, kind of thing. And that kind of stuff's going to vastly improve it. So I think that there's a lot of scope to improve here, that we'll see. But that's going to be in the concept, I think, of our 10x, 100x super user who's like, okay, normally I get other people to do these tasks. Now I can get them done myself. Like you say, I give it a checklist in the morning, it goes off, solves all my problems. That gives me time to go do other problems and all that. But then level 2 is going to be, okay, I would like to do this task, but I don't have any idea how to do it. Ask the AI, it can do it, and you're pretty confident it can get out there and solve your problem. Like, that's the exciting level, and I do think that's coming.
So let's talk about some real use cases that I think in the short term might be interesting. I have a friend that goes into people's homes that are disabled and figures out like how to fit out the home so that they can stay in the home, right? I think there's a name for that job. I'm not sure what it is. But he goes in, he basically takes notes, and then he fills in this report for the government. And that's pretty much his job, to get funding for them to then go and implement the stuff. And he hates that part of his job. And it's incredibly frustrating.
So like the whole job.
Yeah, he hates the whole job. But the point I'm trying to make is, you can imagine in the pretty near term, right, having a workspace computer set up, having all the correct logins to the platforms required, and then he comes back to the agent or dictates to the agent with voice and says, okay, here's my notes from that particular house call or whatever I did. And it's like, you know, cool, Jeff. His name's not Jeff. I'm going to use the name Jeff. Cool, Jeff. I'm going to go off now and fill that in and submit it. Do you want to check it before it's done? Here it is, done, bang. Like, that would be pretty game changing in the short term. And I think that with the computer use and having an actual computer environment, that's closer. Whereas before, if you think about the old technique, right now it's like, okay, you go into your preferred AI app, you ask it for chunks of paragraphs, you're cutting and pasting into, like, say, a Word template or a website or whatever, it's just doing that next step for you. Like it's just putting it in.
Yeah, it's like I think about it in a sort of chatbot support role, like because we saw that in the early Gen AI shit where everybody released a chatbot on their website. But what you spoke to me about at the time we were talking about it was the idea that you could give the agent some agency, like it could process refunds up to a certain amount, it could answer stock inquiries, it could do whatever. Now, you could enable that for way more businesses by simply logging it in and pointing it at your various tools and having it have the agency to go off and actually do that stuff. And so that could be done even in scenarios where someone doesn't have the budget or technical expertise to empower the thing to actually do stuff. And those kind of things I think will become really common where it's like, okay, this is a simple and repetitive task, but like the amounts are different, the timing's different, the actual product they're talking about is different or whatever it is. But the AI is smart enough to be able to accommodate the particular situation and know when to escalate and things like that. And I think that's the idea, is that you don't have to wait for some AI startup in every niche industry in order to be able to leverage the models. And I think that's the real thing, because obviously it would be better if everyone just built an API for everything and a dedicated LLM solution for every problem. That's not going to happen. This interface allows those situations, those esoteric situations where there's no budget to use AI for it, to use AI for it.
So how do we get there? That's my next question, is like, what is left? I mean, we have literally been working on this every night for 2 weeks or a week, and I don't know, time goes so quick. But, like we've become obsessed with the idea of like, what do you actually need to get it to be able to do these like first rung tasks where people are getting actual value out of this, and it starts to feel life changing.
I think my natural instinct and my natural answer is iteration. You've got to actually find real use cases, wait for them to fail, work out why it failed, and then give it the tools and capabilities to overcome that problem in the future. So far, everything I've run into has been fixable. So, for example, clicking the wrong icon or something like that, or trying to open Firefox when it isn't installed, or what's another good example of something where it's failing? Like, oh, it couldn't backspace correctly, or it was trying key combinations that weren't translated correctly to the machine in order to operate. And so it's like this sort of basic early learning stuff that just needs a little bit of special casing, a little bit of John Carmack style programming, where it's like, if this exact thing happens, do this. And I think improving the tools in that way, and like for us, we have the platform of Sim Theory. We're going to let hundreds of people use this, get feedback, and iterate on that. We're using it ourselves intensely, and I think what will happen is we will build up this tool that has the ability to, like, I don't know the right word, but it's sort of like, I think empowerment is the right way. Like, we need to empower the AI to overcome all of the little issues it hits and all of the little quirks it has because of deficiencies. So you mentioned to me a great one. We were setting a desktop background for the Sim Theory workspace computer, and I did some futuristic Fifth Element style spacescape thing, and you're like, yeah, that's going to confuse the shit out of the AI on the screenshots. Let's do something really thanks. Let's do really something really simple and basic, high contrast. And I'm like, that makes sense. And I think this is the thing. We need to facilitate and give it the best opportunity of success. And part of that is going to be, like, I actually include this in prompts sometimes. In the past, when you face this situation, you did this, but that was wrong. You should have done this. And just have a whole bunch of rules like that you're feeding into it, so it can overcome those mistakes first time and get further down the line with everything. And I think also that also means less iteration, so less cost, more speed. You're more inclined to try it for more things. Like, partly it's like, can we get traction for the workspace computer concept so more time is spent on it? Like, look at us. We are literally speculating, saying, we think this is the future. Should we spend time on it? Is this something worthwhile spending time on, or is it just the fad of the week? And to me, getting uptake and getting people actually using it for real stuff is key to its development, because it could fail if not enough people are actually interested enough to be using it, and therefore running into the scenarios and therefore giving the feedback and improving it.
It just feels like every other thing we've seen in AI, like, somewhat like Open Interpreter had this computer control. We demoed it on the show like 45 episodes ago or something like that, right? And at the time, we just sort of dismissed it as this is so far into the future yet. Like, we're not even close. There's all these other problems to solve first, and it's not that useful. That was our sort of, hot take at the time, right or wrong. And then I think what we're seeing from these labs is they sort of go away and really work on these concepts. Like, they take some of the best ideas from the open source community, or the ideas of just people that are kind of hacking on this stuff, and then they make it accessible via an API, or they basically distribute it and make it slightly more useful.
Yeah.
We're seeing that this week as well with search. Like, originally, if you think about it, Perplexity came out and said, we're going to build a search engine on top of AI, right? Then everyone else has seen this start to succeed and say, well, we need to add search as well. And before that, I think in LangChain, there was tools very early on to add Google search to the toolkit of your AI bots, like, not that long after the GPT-4 launch. So to me, it's just a case of like, do we need how far, like how many more iterations are we? Like, do we see an OpenAI model come out soon where they've taken this concept even further and then it gets to a point where everyone's eyes open? Or is there going to be an in-between phase where we're building tools and trying to make this stuff better? Or does it just rely on that core model?
And I think based on what you're saying, I think the implication here is these guys don't know. And I think that's what we see in the media a lot, is this idea that OpenAI is like all knowing about the future, and they're just drip feeding us poor peasants with stuff as they see fit, and all that, and they've got it all figured out. But I actually think if you look at their product releases and what actually comes out, and even I include Anthropic in this, to some degree, like you say, what they're reacting to is everybody's mind awakening to the possibilities as they use the technology, and then exploring some of those concepts at the model level. And the other one is simply copying the best ideas from the community and realizing, hey, this is the way to do it. We're going to move in that direction, because almost everything the major AI model companies have done are things we discussed many months earlier. I'm not saying we had anything to do with it. I'm just saying that the sort of zeitgeist of people thinking about it and trying it is leading to these new ideas, and then they have the budget and ability to go explore those ideas and implement them in concrete ways.
Yeah, and that's a good pivot to SearchGPT or SearchGPT ChatGPT Search, it's now called. So OpenAI obviously today introduced ChatGPT Search, where you can click in ChatGPT Search on this search button, and then it sort of switches it over to search mode. And I think what is really interesting about that, back to your point, is we had Perplexity come out, quite some time ago, right? And say they're going to take on Google with search using AI, and I think they're doing a pretty good job of that, right? But then OpenAI has obviously seen this success and said, okay, well, we're going to do search now too. And it does seem like, like when the iPhone first released and Apple opened the App Store, and then eventually they slowly just took out the best apps and just baked them into iOS or cloned those apps. It kind of feels a little bit like that, but it does make sense for ChatGPT to have search, and it's taking quite a while to do it. And I think a few things on this. The first is all of those deals they cut with publishers was around this product, and figuring out how do they essentially not get a ton of lawsuits going after them from these publishers. And that's the problem Perplexity is facing right now. They're getting a ton of lawsuits from people saying, they're stealing information or misrepresenting it and things like that. So ChatGPT Search is available. I did put it to the test a little bit and had to play with it. My first search was trying to be as controversial as possible with Trump polls. So this is like the total like plus command in here. So I put in Trump polls, and I got back, a summary of the polls, a series of links, Reuters, New York Magazine. It seems to really like New York Magazine. I got this source quite a few times. Never really heard of New York Magazine, but I guess they've cut a deal with them, so they're putting them up there. So you get your sources. You can click into more sources as well and see like a series of what you would call blue links on Google search as well. So it goes through the search results and has the links as well. Now, I did also do this same search in Perplexity. And to be fair to Perplexity here, I'm not even authenticated or logged in here. I just use their sort of vanilla, their vanilla free search out of the gate. So it has the sources up top. It chose similar sources, really. It featured New York Times, BBC, and then this Projects 530. What was interesting about that is it actually presents a chart of the poll movement over time. So it has the general election polling for Trump, so I can look into that data, which is pretty cool. And then it goes through national polling, battleground states, electoral college outlook. So it's pretty comprehensive. Like if you were doing actual thorough research and you didn't just want a quick answer to the question that you asked, then I think Perplexity would be, pretty superior here to ChatGPT still. But it's a lot of reading still, and I'm just not sure like it's the best use of AI search. Like I would just like one line, like some one line summary. I don't really want to read an essay on it. I also put it into Sim Theory just to compare our search feature as well. And it returned, here are the latest polling results regarding Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. It went through the 3 key battleground states, and then finally it finished on the national average. So I actually thought if I was trying to objectively compare answers, I'd probably give Perplexity the most comprehensive answer.
Oh, I thought you were going to say objectively Sim Theory was the best.
No.
Say that as totally impartial.
Totally impartial. No, but I would actually give Sim Theory second, if I'm being honest, for this particular search, because it just summarized what I wanted to know or what you would expect to know. Whereas with ChatGPT, it really expects me to read like a lot of words. I can't estimate how many words this would be, but like 300 words or something.
It's one of the reasons I use the O1 models so seldom, because it's like I don't need to know all this crap. Like, just give me the bit that I want. Don't give me a 10-page explanation about why. And like, I know that that's sort of part of it. It almost has to write the explanation to give a better answer, if you know what I mean. But it just doesn't know when to shut up sometimes.
Yeah, and I think about, obviously they're going to bring the ChatGPT voice capability to this search, which will be a really cool experience. But it's like, I don't want this much information being read back to me. Like I kind of think it should be a tune where it gives a brief, like a small answer, and then you can be like, okay, expand, like, unleash the hounds on this thing. Give me the full answer. So the second query I tried was best sushi restaurants near me. Now, all apps seem to fail at this in a way because they don't have my exact location. I guess they're just basing it off IP, and my IP address is routing through servers in Sydney, so it thinks I'm in Sydney, and specifically downtown Sydney.
Downtown. Yeah, we all call it that. Heading to downtown
that's
Sydney.
the word. So Sydney boasts a vibrant sushi scene with numerous exceptional results. Here are some top-rated sushi establishments you might consider. Pretty cool interactive map in their UI. You can scroll through it nicely. Having visited a lot of these restaurants, I think their ordering's pretty good as well. So I was quite impressed with that. I'm not sure where they pipe that data from. I'm assuming Bing, everyone's favorite search engine. And then below that, you can click into sources and you get this side panel with all the different links that it kind of used to bring up those results. So pretty interesting. Then you compare Google to it, and I don't know, I'd still kind of trust Google in this case. The Google Maps product is just, I think, vastly superior. They've got all the reviews. Like, it just still seems better to me. But when you do that poll search with Google, naturally, that's when this kind of search starts to feel outdated. It just doesn't give you an answer. It just gives you like 4 top stories and then just a sea of blue links. And it's the first time comparing those searches, I'm like, this is just so out of date at this point. Like, I don't want to do that anymore, and I probably won't in the future. To get an
Yeah, it's
answer.
almost like applied knowledge in a way. Like a lot of the searches I do are how to do something. And it's like, well, if you're going to tell me how, you might as well be specific. Like, how do I do it in this exact context? And that's something a Google search will never be able to do. So,
Yes. So
sorry.
I don't know. Like they've also got a Chrome plugin out, so you can like make this Search GPT or whatever they're calling it the default search engine. Like, do you think, can you see yourself like going full on AI search at this point, or is there still times you're using Google?
I mean, to be honest, I only really now go to search engines if it is like a restaurant or something like real world-ish, or I'm desperate and I can't solve my problems using sim theory with whatever model I'm currently selected on. Like, it's very rare that I use Google for anything other than like finding a sporting field or something, concrete and real. Um,
Yeah,
I've,
I
I've
tended to use it to find websites. Like, is like I don't know the URL, so I just literally put in the
Yeah.
address.
Or just because the address bar like automatically goes to Google if you don't type the URL right. Like that's probably accidental searches are probably my number one thing. And I don't think I would use it like a search engine for serious research anymore because I just don't I fundamentally just don't trust the results. I think that it's political, it's biased, and it's corrupt.
Yeah, I mean, all that stuff aside,
Yeah, sorry.
sweeping all that aside, I don't know. Like, the thing with me is I've tried Perplexity for search, like those other searches, and I find when I search, as you said, it's generally for localized information, right? Like things near me, the weather, stuff like that, right? And I think right now Google just has so much better knowledge of that world and those search queries that are just so common to me that I still prefer it for those things. So my brain naturally will just go back to it. But definitely for learning things or figuring things out, where with code or something like that, where you might have searched Google before, that is just completely and utterly gone for me and fully replaced.
The barrier, I think, is going to be them getting people to install it on either their phone or their browser because really, like day to day, if you do decide I'm going to search a search engine for something, you're just going to type into whatever box is available to you, right? Like you're not going to go, oh, log into Perplexity. Oh, shit, what's my password? Did I sign up with Google or did I sign up with whatever? I got to log in. Okay, now I've got the search box. Now I'll search. Like no one's going to do that, I think, on a regular basis unless they're excited by the novelty of AI or think they're getting vastly superior results because of it and are willing to take the time to do it. Like, I think the people who are going to win en masse will continue to be the large tech companies because they control the platforms like Apple, Google, maybe Microsoft in terms of desktop.
It got me thinking though, does Google need at this point an AI search subscription? Like if you were them, or like if I was them, I would just go and clone this version of search, right? And call it like Google Search Plus and just charge for it.
Yeah, I think what they do need to do is piss off, sorry about all the swearing, with all this passive AI because I think the passive AI stuff is annoying and it breeds mistrust and frustration. So, for example, now like on Facebook and I think Instagram, but at least Facebook, every time there's comments, it's like commenters generally thought the dog was very cute and this invoked a feeling of family and togetherness. It's like, come on. I don't like, I'm not stupid. Like, I can figure out for myself what people generally feel about it. And also, like, if I'm browsing Facebook, I'm not exactly pressed for time. I desperately need to know what everyone thought of like Halle Berry's latest summer swimsuit catalog. Like, I don't need the consensus opinion written by an AI proactively. And it's the same when Google did it with Gemini. It's like, I don't really need your like I want if I want to ask the AI, I'm going to ask the AI. I don't want you to do it for me in this sort of condescending way.
It's AI for the sake of shareholders, not AI for the sake
Yeah.
of humans and users.
Great way to put it. I think that's what they want to say is we're innovating, and they're like, oh, we've got 1 billion users of AI a day. Yeah, because you didn't give them a choice.
Yeah, I think that's why like Notebook LM worked, because they just had a team of people going, oh, how do we like do the best RAG for people, where they just start with files, do some RAG on it, and then, you know, the podcast trend, which is kind of interesting, but I think was also like, you know, people got excited about it. It's not like something you're just constantly out producing podcasts. Please don't. Please don't.
It's like,
I'm threatened by it.
I only consume information in podcast form. And I listen to it on 4 times speed, so I get through it pretty quick. But I'm consuming like 36 hours of content a day in podcast form. That's why I'm so clever.
But I do think that's why Notebook LM worked, right, for them, because it was like organically built. They didn't have the problem of having to like take an existing product that people are already familiar with and then jam something into it. It was like you can start from scratch. So it feels like their best play here would be to create like Google Search 2. And, you know, just say to people, like, if you want ads, we're going to put ads in it, and your AI is going to sort of, you know, give you whatever take you want on the information. If you don't want ads, pay, and then we'll just give you a clean search experience completely integrated into everything Google that you're already using. And I think it's kind of getting to that point where they're going to have to do this at some point, because as more consumers find out that you don't have to like trawl through a sea of blue links, which are mostly ads, and you can just get answers and a great voice experience for search, like it's over. Like slowly but surely it will die. Like it'll take years and years and years for their revenue to decline.
But the thing is, like, they still have the platform, and I think you're right. They will have to have an offering at some point, but they've got a little bit of time up their sleeve. The other interesting thing I found about the SearchGPT is the fact that you need to specifically enable it. And this is something we've talked about before, where in SimTheory V1, we did this sort of auto thing where the AI would sort of figure out, oh, he said, I'd like to see an image of this, or, you know, I'd like to find out about the Trump polling or whatever it is. And it would decide, okay, I'm going to do a search to find out about that, similar to the early tool use cases. But what we found was that it often led to it doing things you didn't want. Like, I don't want you doing a search every time I ask a question. And also, I don't want the lag of it having to make the decision before it proceeds with getting me an answer quickly. So it's interesting that they also chose to make you specifically press a button to make it a search, rather than using some sort of routing method to decide this is a search or this isn't.
I think it's just so bad, because otherwise the AI will lean too heavily into search, and it's always doing a search, and it's slower, so you're getting a slower response. It's putting random sources into the answer, and you're like, I didn't really want this. Like, I just want that AI answer version of it, of like a pretty established way of doing something. Yeah. Whereas, I think when you invoke search and you tell it, no, I want to search, it's just a much better experience. And they've come to that conclusion clearly as well. And I think this is why it's so hard to get function calling going, and why we haven't seen function calling with, say, the GPT voice yet, because it's hard. Like, the function calling is hard to do right, and hard to figure out which function to actually call. Like, what is the user actually asking for?
And that is really what the desktop or the computer tool thing is, because it's a whole series of chain tool calling. But I think that in that context, it actually makes sense. If the AI is left to its own devices, it absolutely should be told the full arsenal of tools it has at its disposal and decide when to use them. But when it's the user, I think the user should decide. And I think that's what we're seeing in this update.
All right, let's move on. So earlier this week, Microsoft obviously owns GitHub, which is the repository of pretty much all the code in the world, struck a deal with OpenAI as rivals, including
I was going to say,
I know, with rivals, Google Gemini, so Google's Gemini model, and also Anthropic's Sonnet model to use in the Copilot product. And so, for those that are unfamiliar, the GitHub Copilot product helps developers write code. It'll do things like autocomplete. It also has an inbuilt chat, where you can add some files into it and be like, how do I do this? It writes a lot of code. Like Google came out this week in their earnings and said, I think a quarter of their code now is written by their AI models internally. I struggle to actually believe that because Gemini is just so bad. But
it's probably because it just produces such verbose output that it's like it's just producing lines and lines, but they don't really do very much.
Yeah, but this kind of took me by surprise, at least, because you've obviously got that really strong partnership between Microsoft and OpenAI. Like they're in bed together. But what's happened, at least with developers, over the last, I guess, 3 months or 4 months since Sonnet came out, is developers have just realized it's better at code. It's better at code completion. It's better to sort of work back and forward with it at most coding tasks. And the latest tune is even, far superior than the previous. So what was happening is you had startups like Cursor, which is another IDE that people were starting to use, which was just defaulting to Claude Sonnet and using Claude Sonnet and then giving people tools around writing code with that particular model. Now, I think what's super interesting about this is obviously Microsoft with Copilot has realized that people are just going to go to Cursor because devs are willing to pick up new tools quickly. Like they obviously prefer the Claude Sonnet model. Maybe they saw a drop in Copilot usage or they didn't like what they were seeing. So they've gone and partnered with Google and Anthropic to provide the Gemini model, which I think honestly is just to be able to say to the OpenAI guys, like, oh no, we're partnering with everyone.
It's
really?
Like I'm cheating on you with multiple people.
Yeah,
so
with multiple
okay.
women, so it's fine. But I think what's really happened here, and everyone, I mean, this is just such an obvious conclusion, is Anthropic's model's better. It's better. I'm putting it out there. It's better than like O1 Preview, O1 Mini. It's just better for this particular use case. And so I think they've just had to admit defeat on it and say, look, guys, they've built a better model. This is a huge business for us now. We're just going to go with the best model.
Yeah, they can't risk it. And I think that's the thing. People, when they're doing real work, they will use the best thing. It's not gonna be about loyalty or being a fan of something. You're gonna do what works for you.
Yeah,
I do.
And this is why, like, honestly, with ChatGPT, it's like, as a power user of AI, it's like they can release as many features like search and voice and all this stuff. And it's like, at the end of the day, I just want to be able to pick between different models and always have the latest and greatest model, or switch between models. Like I don't really want model lock. And I guess that's as they build these ecosystems around their models, that's kind of what's happening, similar to Apple's ecosystem. Like you're getting locked into a model vendor that may not necessarily be the best level of intelligence for the task that you want to do.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I use Copilot a lot, but I basically use it as advanced autocomplete. Like I sort of start typing what I know needs to come next and do it. If I actually want to generate real code for something significant, I'll go to Sim Theory and use one of the models there, usually Claude Sonnet, sometimes others, depending on the problem. But I don't think I've ever used the Copilot chat feature where you actually talk to the model directly in there.
Yeah, I mean, I did, to be fair, try Cursor for a little while, and there's some great features in that product. I just found myself, though, wanting some sort of like separation between the AI outputs I was getting, because I like sort of tuning an agent and then getting it into a scenario to answer the question right. And then I'm always checking the code I'm adding anyway, and sometimes rewriting it. So I find myself doing big insertions or replaces, even though it shows me what it's changing. I don't know. It just didn't work for me, and maybe I need to put more effort into it. But I definitely still prefer like standalone. Like this is where I'm conversing with my coworker, and this is where I'm doing my work. And maybe that's just me.
Yeah, and I think that's the other point, is I understand that when you use Copilot, it understands the concept of the surrounding code, which is useful because it can know variable names, it can know things like that. But what I find the difference with using it in, say, Sim Theory when I'm working with an agent, and I'm not isolating this to Sim Theory, I'm just saying like when you're working with a sort of chat style agent, ongoing conversation, is it gets to know the problem you're solving, the things you've already tried, the previous iterations. it really gets the problem better. And I find deep into a session like that, I treasure that chat session because I'm like, we are so close to solving this difficult problem here. And then I can be lazy with my prompts and go, oh, okay, now I need a method to do X, which is just some small extension. Like to give you an example with the workspace computers, like I want a command that's just going to list out the status of the current workspace computers. And it knows exactly what I mean by that and just prints out a copy paste method I can just chuck straight in. Like that's
Yeah,
so
yeah.
valuable. And you just can't do that with Copilot. Like you can't say, hey, write a method to do this. I mean, it might start, it might write a couple of lines of it for you, but it just won't do it right now. And I think maybe it will with Sonnet, and that might be an advancement, but you just still wonder if the actual interface is right for that kind of problem.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'd be interested in the comments of people that do write code, which I know a lot of our listeners do. If you do prefer working in the IDE, like having everything in there, like the chat and everything, or if you still are going to like ChatGPT or whatever to work in that scenario. Because I'm just like, I don't know if I'm just biased or if because I started doing this so long ago, I've formed a habit around it. Like this is just how I now work with AI when
Mm.
coding. So I'm just used to it. And then going and trying any of these other ways of doing it, I don't know if it makes sense. And even with Copilot, then I'm like, oh, am I going to hit like a limit or like, I don't really know how it's going to handle the context. But it does make me think we really need to get our sort of context trimming and prioritization concept out into the world at some point soon, because I really think the more we talk about this, there is a sense of just, controlling the context is, I think, going to be the next, at least short-term innovation that helps get more out of the models.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about that. We know that the models are capable of so much, and it's really a matter of you getting it the right information at the right time and doing it in a way that's effortless because it's very time consuming to get all the pieces in place. And that's why I think when I talk about a session that builds up like that, you've built its context over time, and that's why you end up with something so valuable at the end of it. And I think any work that helps facilitate people getting into that state, either with less technical expertise or less time and effort, will be valuable.
They also announced GitHub Spark, which is a product. It's very similar to Claude's artifacts. So you can essentially go in and get it to create you like a mini app. I think that the difference here is it's not just open chat, like that you've got tabs like for the theme of it, and you can say I want rounded corners, I don't. So it just makes the workflow of it a lot easier. So, and it also has like a little database behind it. So for example, one of the things I've got up on the screen now is someone's built an app for karaoke night, and people can say if they're attending or not, and it's like a custom page to go and do that. It's pretty cool. Like you could imagine as these get easier to write, like with Halloween in my neighborhood last night, like you could have a little applet where people can list if they're getting involved or not, right? And then you've got this like little app that everyone can share around. So I can see these being pretty valuable with GitHub. I'm not sure what their reasoning is, but behind building these little applets and putting them out there, but it's a pretty cool feature. It takes care of everything for you, so like hosting, database backend, and stuff like that. But
That's impressive. I
yeah,
think that stuff is what is needed to take it from just being a novelty to being actually useful.
yeah. So and then you've got like this cool version control UI on the left hand side where you can go through it. I think for like people that are like semi-technical and just want to go build little apps that they use that are useful to them, it's a great concept and will be very useful. I can't really imagine this becoming like a mainstream thing where everyone's building like little random apps. But, as these things get more advanced, maybe GitHub Spark is something in the future you'll really spark ideas from. It sounds like a paid promotion at this point. So I'll stop.
Spark your ideas with GitHub Copilot. We'll sponsor them, whatever.
But what do you make
mean,
of
they'll
this?
sponsor
Like as we get towards the end of the year here and kind of wrapping up this episode, like to me, one of the most exciting things this year has been obviously the Claude Sonnet model. I think that was really just the tune of it's such a great model. I think it's kind of been interesting around O1 Mini and O1 Preview. I'm curious when we get the final O1, which I get the impression we'll be able to do multimodality and generate images and do a whole bunch of stuff really well. If that'll change things, or we still prefer like a Sonnet tune of the model, or is there some sort of step change function coming? But it does seem like everyone is now just building features. And if we were really close to AGI, like these guys spout all the time, why are they releasing, a search or a Perplexity clone in the back half of the year? Like, it doesn't add up in my head at this point.
Yeah, I've sort of got two ideas. One is that there's two major factions in the company. One is the sort of model building, and the other one is like, we've got to compete with the big tech dudes, like, and therefore releasing search is good. Like, I think my opinion is that's the most likely. Is there's two parts of the company. One is the commercialization part, which is what we're seeing most updates out on. The other one is the guys iterating on models. Because I just think about what the iteration cycle of building a new model is. Like, you screw it up, it's like, okay, we just spent $3 million in 10 weeks and it failed because I forgot to put a semicolon on line 71. Like, oh man, like, it could be like, okay, sure, it's probably a higher level of technical difficulty than I can possibly understand, but I would imagine it's something like that. Or you get through the cycle and you try it and you're like, this isn't very good. Like, we need to go again, and it's just time consuming and expensive. So it could be that better models are coming. It's just that it's just taking longer than they expect. I mean, we experience that ourselves. You try something, realize, like the workspace computer, for example, the first way I tried to do that was a fail and I had to redo it. And I think that they're probably experiencing a similar thing. But
Right.
I do agree with you that I don't think it is the case that OpenAI is just sitting on all this gold and they just trickle it as and when they choose. I think they're working as hard as everyone else trying to make the most of this boom.
All right. So if you are interested in using the workspace computer, we said we would try and get it out this week. Turns out a little bit harder than we thought. So we are aiming for early next week. So stay tuned on that front. If you are,
Yeah, and I think it's worth mentioning. I'm pretty confident about that now because like we're using it. It's really just a matter of making sure we can make it available to everyone in a way that's going to work immediately for you.
so if you are interested in it, you can sign up at simtheory.ai and you'll get an email announcement when that is released. Any final thoughts on the week that was, Chris?
My final thoughts are workspaces. Been working hard on that, really. And, I made the comment to you this morning that I'm actually excited to get it live just so I can play with it a bit. Like I feel like I'm out there building it, but I'm not actually getting to use it so much.
Yeah,
So
it's
I'm
going to be
very
good
keen.
content for next week's show. I'm looking
And
forward.
I think I promised someone on the Discord that I would try to get it to format my hard drive. So I promise once it's ready, I'm going to run like a local version on my actual PC and give it administrator privileges and just see how much damage it can do. Mate, I'll record it, but I might record it with like a phone camera in case it actually starts to destroy stuff. Maybe I should actually give it access to my email and encourage it to send high risk emails.
I reckon that would be better. I think next week we give it access to your email and get it to try and do something that would be upsetting.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'll come up with something and I'll give it a good crack.
All right. Thanks for joining us again. We'll see you next week. Goodbye.